The rope burn on Camila Herrera's wrist had not yet healed when the wagon wheel broke 3 miles outside of Wickenburg, Arizona, and she knew with a sinking certainty that her luck had run from bad to worse. The summer of 1879 had been unforgiving in ways that had nothing to do with the desert heat that shimmered across the cracked earth, and everything to do with the color of her skin, which marked her as different in a territory where different meant dangerous. Her father had been Mexican, her mother Apache, and the combination had made her beautiful in a way that unsettled people, with skin the color of burnished copper and eyes so dark they seemed to hold secrets. Those secrets were simple enough. She wanted only to survive, to find a place where she could exist without apology. But survival had proven more difficult than she had imagined when she fled Santa Fe 3 months ago. The wagon tilted at a sharp angle, and Camilla climbed down carefully, her worn boots sinking into the sand. She had purchased the wagon, and the tired mule pulling it with the last of her savings. Money she had earned washing clothes and mending saddles, work that paid little but asked no questions. The mule looked at her with patient brown eyes, and she stroked its neck, whispering words of comfort in Spanish that her mother had taught her before the fever took her 10 years ago. Her father had followed 6 months later, his heart broken beyond repair, and Camilla had been alone ever since, moving from town to town, always one step ahead of trouble that seemed to find her regardless. She examined the wheel and saw that the wooden spoke had cracked clean through, a problem she could not fix with hope or prayer. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful if she were not stranded on a road that saw little traffic. Wickenburg lay ahead, a town she had never visited but had heard described as rough and unwelcoming to outsiders, particularly those who did not fit neatly into categories that people understood. She had hoped to pass through quickly, to buy supplies, and continue west toward California, where she had heard there were communities more accepting of mixed blood, though she had learned long ago not to trust every story she heard. The sound of hoofbeats made her turn, her hand instinctively moving to the knife she kept hidden in her boot. A single rider approached from the direction of Wickenburg, his silhouette dark against the setting sun. Camilla stood straight, lifting her chin in a gesture of defiance she had perfected over years of being looked at like something that needed to be swept away. The rider slowed as he neared, and she could make out more details. A man perhaps in his mid-20s wearing a dusty hat and a blue shirt faded from too many washings, with a leather vest that had seen better days. His horse was a good one, though, a bay gelding with intelligent eyes, and that told her something about the man's character, for people who treated their animals well were often better than those who did not. "Trouble?" the man called out, his voice carrying easily across the still air. He kept his distance, which she appreciated, not crowding her space or assuming familiarity. "Broken wheel," Camilla replied, her English clear but accented in a way that immediately marked her heritage. She watched his face carefully for the usual reaction, the narrowing of eyes or the hardening of expression that preceded cruelty, but saw only genuine concern. The man dismounted and walked closer, his movements unhurried. "That's bad luck," he said, crouching to examine the damage. "This spoke split right through. You won't make it another mile on this." He looked up at her, and she found herself meeting eyes that were a startling shade of blue-green, like the shallow parts of a river. "Where you headed?" "West," Camilla said, offering no more information than necessary. She had learned that lesson hard in a town called Socorro, where she had made the mistake of trusting a woman who seemed kind, only to wake to find a mob outside her boarding house, accusing her of stealing items that had later turned up in their original places. The woman had apologized with empty words, but Camilla had already been marked, and she had fled in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on her back and the certainty that kindness was often a trap. The man stood, removing his hat to wipe his brow, revealing hair the color of wheat at harvest time. "Name's Carter Tate," he said, extending his hand. "I work at the Turner Ranch, about 2 miles outside of Wickenburg. I can help you get this wagon to town, but it will take some doing." Camilla hesitated before taking his hand, her fingers small and calloused against his larger palm. "Camila Herrera," she said, waiting for recognition or judgment, but Carter's expression remained open and friendly. Pleased to meet you, Miss Herrera, Carter said, releasing her hand and surveying the situation. If you can unhitch your mule, I can tie a rope from my horse and we can drag the wagon. It won't be pretty, but it will get you to town before full dark. There's a wheelwright there, old fellow named Thompson, who can fix this up good as new. I have little money, Camilla admitted, hating the words, but knowing that honesty now would save her trouble later. I can pay something, but not much. Carter settled his hat back on his head and shrugged. We will worry about that when we get there. Can't leave you stranded out here. Nights get cold, and there's been reports of bandits on this road. Not safe for anyone, let alone a woman traveling alone. He paused, then added carefully, If you don't mind my saying. Camilla did not mind, because the words were spoken with respect rather than condescension, and she had learned to distinguish between the two. She nodded and moved to unhitch the mule, her fingers working quickly at the worn leather straps. Carter retrieved a coil of rope from his saddle and set about securing it to the wagon's axle, his movements practiced and efficient. Within 15 minutes, they had arranged a makeshift towing system, with Carter's horse in the lead, followed by Camilla's mule and the broken wagon dragging behind. The journey into Wickenburg was slow and awkward, the damaged wheel creating a terrible scraping sound that set Camilla's teeth on edge. Carter walked beside his horse, speaking to it in a low, soothing voice, while Camilla led her mule, grateful for the help, but wary of the cost it might demand. Kindness always had a cost, she had learned, and she wondered what Carter Tate would expect in return for his assistance. Men often thought that helping a woman created a debt that could be paid in ways she was never willing to give. The sun had nearly set when they reached the outskirts of Wickenburg, a town that looked much like every other frontier settlement Camilla had seen. A main street lined with wooden buildings, some painted and some bare, with boardwalks that were more gap than plank. A saloon stood on one corner, its windows glowing with lamplight and echoing with the tinny sound of a piano. Across the street was a general store, already closed for the evening, and beyond that, a livery stable with doors open wide to catch the cooler air. Carter led them directly to a building set back from the main street, a workshop with wood shavings scattered around the entrance and the smell of sawdust heavy in the air. He called out a greeting, and a man emerged from inside, wiping his hands on a rag that might once have been white. The man was old, with a beard that reached his chest and eyes that were sharp despite his age. Carter, the man said, nodding a greeting. Then his gaze shifted to Camilla, and she saw the change instantly, the way his expression closed like a door slamming shut. What's this? This is Miss Herrera, Carter said, his tone remaining friendly, but gaining an edge that suggested he had noticed the wheelwright's reaction. She's got a broken wheel that needs fixing. Can you help her out, Thompson? Thompson's eyes moved from Camilla to Carter and back again, his jaw working as if chewing on words he was trying not to spit out. Finally, he said, I don't do work for her kind. Take it somewhere else. The words hit Camilla like stones, sharp and heavy, but she kept her expression neutral. She had heard variations of this sentiment too many times to let it show how deeply it cut, how it made her feel like something less than human, undeserving of basic decency. Carter's jaw tightened, and he took a step closer to Thompson. Her kind? She's a woman with a broken wagon wheel, same as anyone else who might need your services. I'd think a businessman would see it that way. You think wrong, Thompson said, crossing his arms over his chest. I don't have to work for anybody I don't want to, and I don't want to work for mixed breeds who come into decent towns thinking they belong. We've got standards here, Tate, even if you've forgotten them. Camilla felt heat rise in her cheeks, anger mixing with humiliation in a combination she had felt far too often. It is fine, she said quietly to Carter. I will find another way. There is no other wheelwright in Wickenburg, Carter said, his eyes still locked on Thompson. And you know it. He turned to Camilla, and his expression softened. Don't give up yet. Let me try something else. To Thompson, he said, what if I pay for the work? My money's as good as anyone's. Isn't it? Thompson's expression grew calculating. Your money's fine, but I still won't do the work. Not for her. You can try the blacksmith, though I expect he'll tell you the same thing. Or you can take that wagon and that woman right back out of town where they belong." Carter's hands clenched into fists at his sides, and for a moment, Camilla thought he might strike the older man, but instead, he took a deep breath and stepped back. "Come on, Miss Herrera," he said. "We'll find another solution." They left the wheelwright's shop, and Camilla felt the weight of failure pressing down on her shoulders. She had known it would be difficult, but she had not expected to be turned away so completely, to be denied even the basic transaction of commerce. Carter walked beside her, his anger evident in the rigid set of his shoulders, and she found herself wondering why he cared, why he had not simply shrugged and left her to deal with the consequences of being born wrong. "I am sorry to have wasted your time," Camilla said, as they stood in the street, the wagon still hitched to Carter's horse. Around them, people walked past, some glancing curiously at the scene, others deliberately looking away. She could feel their judgment like a physical presence pressing against her skin. "You didn't waste anything," Carter said firmly. "Thompson's a bigoted fool, but that doesn't mean we're out of options. I can fix the wheel myself. It won't be as pretty as Thompson would make it, but it will hold. I've got tools back at the ranch, and wood that will work. It will take a day, maybe two, but I can do it." Camilla looked at him, searching for the hidden motive, the angle that would reveal itself when she was most vulnerable. "Why would you do this for me? You do not know me. You owe me nothing." Carter met her gaze directly, his blue-green eyes serious and sincere. "My mother always taught me that you judge a person by their character, not by things they can't control. You seem like someone who's had a rough time through no fault of your own, and I don't see any reason to make it rougher. Besides, it's the right thing to do, and I try to do right when I can." His words were so simple, so straightforward, that Camilla felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she had not realized she was carrying. She nodded slowly, not trusting herself to speak without her voice breaking. Carter smiled at her, a genuine expression that reached his eyes, and she found herself smiling back, tentatively, like someone testing frozen ground to see if it would hold. "There's a boarding house on the edge of town," Carter said. "Mrs. Patterson runs it, and she's fair-minded. She might not welcome you with open arms, but she won't turn you away if you can pay. I'll help you get there, and in the morning I'll come back and take your wagon to the ranch where I can work on it. Does that sound acceptable?" "Yes," Camilla said, grateful beyond measure. "Thank you, Mr. Tate." "Carter," he corrected gently. "Just Carter." They made their way through the town as darkness settled fully, the streets emptying as people retreated to their homes or gathered in the saloon. The boarding house was a two-story structure that looked tired but clean, with a porch that wrapped around the front and side. Carter knocked on the door, and after a moment it opened to reveal a woman in her 50s, with gray streaking through brown hair and a face that suggested she had lived through difficulties that had left her both weary and wise. "Carter Tate," the woman said, her tone neutral. "What brings you here at this hour?" "Evening, Mrs. Patterson," Carter said, removing his hat. "This is Miss Camila Herrera. She's traveling through and needs a room for a few nights while her wagon gets repaired. I thought you might have space available." Mrs. Patterson's eyes moved to Camilla, and the assessment was quick and thorough. Camilla had seen it before, the way people took in her features and made immediate judgments, sorting her into categories that determined how she would be treated. Mrs. Patterson's expression revealed little, but when she spoke, her words were matter-of-fact rather than hostile. "I have a room available. It's small and it's on the backside of the house, away from the other guests. 50 cents a night, paid in advance, and that includes breakfast and supper. No visitors allowed, and I expect cleanliness and quiet. Can you agree to those terms?" "Yes," Camilla said, reaching into the pocket of her skirt where she kept her remaining money tied in a handkerchief. She counted out coins for 3 nights, hoping that would be enough time for Carter to repair the wheel, and handed them to Mrs. Patterson. The older woman pocketed the money and stepped aside. Come in then. I'll show you to your room. Mr. Tate, thank you for your assistance and good evening. Carter caught Camilla's eye and nodded. I'll be back at sunrise to collect the wagon, he said. Sleep well, Miss Herrera. Camilla, she said, echoing his earlier correction. Just Camilla. His smile returned, warm and reassuring. Camilla, he repeated, as if testing how her name felt on his tongue. Then he settled his hat back on his head and walked down the porch steps, leading his horse and her mule and the broken wagon back into the night. Mrs. Patterson led Camilla through the boarding house, which was furnished simply but comfortably, with braided rugs on the floors and paintings of landscapes on the walls. True to her word, the room she offered was small and positioned at the rear of the house, but it was clean, with a narrow bed covered in a quilt that looked handmade and a washstand with a pitcher and basin. A single window looked out onto the desert beyond, where the stars were beginning to emerge in a sky that seemed impossibly vast. Breakfast is at 7, Mrs. Patterson said from the doorway. Supper at 6. There's water in the pitcher, and if you need more, there's a pump in the yard. The privy is out back. Any questions? No, Camilla said. Thank you for the room. Mrs. Patterson studied her for a long moment, then said quietly, I don't care much about where people come from or what they look like, but I care a great deal about trouble. Don't bring trouble to my house, Miss Herrera, and we'll get along fine. I do not seek trouble, Camila replied, meeting the older woman's gaze. I only seek peace. Then we understand each other, Mrs. Patterson said, and closed the door behind her as she left. Camilla stood alone in the small room, feeling the exhaustion of the day settle over her like a heavy blanket. She poured water into the basin and washed her face and hands, the cool liquid soothing against her sun-warmed skin. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself a moment to simply breathe, to let the tension drain from her muscles. She thought about Carter Tate, about the way he had helped her without asking for anything in return, and wondered if it was possible that she had finally found someone who saw past her skin to the person underneath. The thought was both hopeful and terrifying, for hope had a way of making disappointment cut deeper, and she had been disappointed so many times before. Sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of faces turning away and doors closing. But when she woke to the sound of birdsong filtering through the window, she felt rested in a way she had not in months. She dressed quickly and made her way downstairs, where the smell of coffee and bacon guided her to a dining room where several other guests were already seated at a long table. The conversation stopped when she entered, and she felt the familiar weight of scrutiny, but she kept her head high and took a seat at the far end of the table, away from the others. Mrs. Patterson appeared with a plate of food, setting it in front of Camilla without comment. The meal was simple but well prepared. Bacon, eggs, biscuits, and gravy that was thick and savory. Camilla ate quietly, aware of the whispers from the other end of the table, but choosing not to acknowledge them. She had learned that reacting only gave people power over her, and she refused to grant them that satisfaction. She had just finished eating when a knock came at the front door, and moments later Carter appeared in the dining room doorway. He looked freshly washed, his hair still damp, and his shirt clean, and when he saw Camilla, his face broke into a smile that made her heart do something unexpected in her chest. Morning, he said, addressing the room in general but keeping his eyes on her. Miss Herrera, I'm here to collect your wagon if you are ready. Camilla rose from the table, nodding. I am ready. Thank you for coming. They walked out together, leaving behind a dining room that erupted in whispers the moment they were gone. Outside, the morning was cool and pleasant, the heat of the day not yet established. Carter had brought a horse and a longer rope, and together they made their way to where the wagon sat in the street near the livery, the mule tied to a post and looking no worse for its night of rest. The ranch is about an hour's ride south, Carter explained as he worked to secure the rope properly. The owner, Mr. Turner, is a good man. He won't mind me taking time to help you out. I've been working for him for 3 years now, ever since I came out from Missouri. He treats his workers fair and pays on time, which is more than you can say for some employers in these parts. You are from Missouri? Camilla asked, curious despite herself. She found herself wanting to know more about this man who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had not spoken. Born and raised on a farm outside of Kansas City, Carter said, checking the knots one final time before straightening. My father was a farmer and a good one, but I wanted to see more of the world than the same fields year after year. When I turned 21, I packed up and headed west. I worked on ranches in Colorado and New Mexico before finding my way here to Arizona. I like it well enough. The land is harsh but honest, if that makes sense. It makes sense, Camilla said softly. The land does not care what color your skin is. It treats everyone with the same indifference. Carter looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw understanding in his eyes. People should be more like the land then, he said. Judge you on what you do, not what you are. They set off through town, Carter leading his horse while Camilla walked beside him, the wagon and mule following behind. People stopped to watch them pass, and Camilla could feel their disapproval like heat radiating from a stove. A group of men standing outside the saloon called out something crude, but Carter ignored them, his jaw tight and his shoulders squared. Camilla was grateful that he did not respond, did not turn their journey into a confrontation that she would somehow be blamed for. Once they cleared the edge of town, the landscape opened into rolling desert, punctuated by saguaro cacti and mesquite trees. The road was well worn, suggesting regular travel between the ranch and Wickenburg, and the journey passed in comfortable conversation. Carter told her about the Turner Ranch, about the cattle they raised, and the horses they bred, about the other workers who had become like family to him. Camilla found herself relaxing in his presence, the armor she usually kept firmly in place, loosening enough for her to share small pieces of her own story. Her parents, her childhood moving from place to place, her hope to find somewhere she could finally belong. California might be that place, Carter said thoughtfully. I've heard there's more opportunity out there, more willingness to see people as individuals. But I've also heard it's not as easy as folks make it sound. Anywhere you go, you'll find people who judge first and think later. The question is whether you find enough good people to outweigh the bad. Have you found that here? Camilla asked. Carter considered the question as they walked. Mostly, he said finally. Mr. Turner and his family are good people. Most of the ranch hands are decent enough. There's always a few who cause trouble, but that's true anywhere. What matters is who you surround yourself with, who you choose to let into your life. He glanced at her, a shy smile crossing his face. I'd like to think I'm one of the good ones, but I suppose that's for others to judge. I think you are, Camilla said quietly, and meant it. The Turner Ranch appeared on the horizon like a mirage, a collection of buildings clustered around a main house that had been built with more care than the typical frontier structure. There were corrals and a barn, a bunkhouse for the workers, and various outbuildings that served purposes Camilla could only guess at. Cattle dotted the landscape, their brown and white shapes moving slowly across the sparse grass. As they approached, several men emerged from the barn, watching their arrival with undisguised curiosity. Carter raised a hand in greeting and led the way to a large shed near the barn, a structure filled with tools and materials. He unhitched the wagon and mule, securing them in the shade, then turned to Camilla. This will take me some time, he said. You are welcome to wait if you like, or I can bring the wagon back to town when it's finished. Whatever you prefer. Camilla hesitated, unsure of the protocol. She did not want to impose, but the thought of walking back to Wickenburg alone, of sitting in that small room at the boarding house with nothing to do but wait, held no appeal. Before she could decide, a voice called out from the direction of the main house. Carter, who have you brought to visit? They turned to see a man approaching, someone in his 50s with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes. He walked with a slight limp, favoring his left leg, but his bearing was confident and welcoming. Mr. Turner, Carter said, removing his hat respectfully. This is Miss Camila Herrera. Her wagon broke down outside of town, and Thompson refused to fix it because of her heritage. I offered to do the repair myself, if that's all right with you. Mr. Turner's expression darkened at the mention of Thompson's refusal, but when he looked at Camilla, his face was gentle. Of course it's all right. We don't turn away people who need help, regardless of who they are or where they come from. Miss Herrera, welcome to the Turner Ranch. I'm Daniel Turner, and that house over there belongs to me and my wife, Margaret. She's inside preparing lunch, and I know she'd be pleased to have you join us while Carter works on your wagon. She loves having visitors, and she'll talk your ear off if you let her. The offer was so unexpected, so genuinely kind, that Camilla felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back quickly, not wanting to embarrass herself. That is very generous, she managed. I do not wish to intrude. No intrusion at all, Mr. Turner said firmly. Come along. Carter, you know where everything is. Take your time and do it right. Camilla found herself being led toward the main house, with Carter watching after her with an encouraging smile. Mr. Turner kept up a steady stream of conversation as they walked, telling her about the ranch and his family, about how he had come to Arizona 20 years ago when it was still wild territory, about the challenges of raising cattle in a land that seemed determined to kill everything that tried to live on it. His voice was soothing, and Camilla realized he was deliberately putting her at ease, giving her time to adjust to her surroundings. The inside of the house was cooler than the outdoors, with thick adobe walls that kept out the heat. It was furnished comfortably with a mix of practical furniture and personal touches that spoke of a family who had made this place their home. A woman appeared from what Camilla assumed was the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron and smiling warmly. Margaret, this is Miss Camila Herrera, Mr. Turner said. She's going to join us for lunch while Carter fixes her wagon. Seems Thompson showed his true colors again and refused to help her. Margaret Turner's face registered surprise and then anger, her lips pressing into a thin line. That man needs to learn some Christian charity, she said sharply. Then turning to Camila, her expression softened. Please forgive our town's rudeness, Miss Herrera. You are most welcome here. Come sit down and rest yourself. You look like you have been traveling hard. Camila allowed herself to be guided to a comfortable chair in the sitting room, and Margaret disappeared to fetch lemonade while Mr. Turner excused himself to attend to ranch business. Left alone, Camila looked around the room, taking in the photographs on the walls, the books on the shelves, the handmade curtains that framed the windows. It was a home filled with love and care, and she felt a pang of longing for something she had never truly had, a place that was hers, where she belonged without question. Margaret returned with glasses of lemonade so cold it made Camilla's teeth ache, and they sat together while the older woman asked gentle questions about Camilla's journey and her plans. Camilla found herself opening up more than she intended, sharing her hopes of reaching California, her fears that she would never find acceptance, her weariness at constantly being judged for things beyond her control. Margaret listened with the kind of attention that made Camilla feel heard, really heard, for the first time in longer than she could remember. The world can be cruel, Margaret said when Camilla had finished, especially to those who are different. But the world is also filled with people like Carter, people who choose kindness over hatred. You just have to find your people, dear, and hold on to them when you do. Carter has been very kind, Camilla said, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. I am grateful for his help. Margaret's eyes twinkled with something that looked like knowing amusement. Carter is a good man, she agreed. One of the best we have working here. He's honest and hardworking, and he has a good heart. His mother raised him right before she passed. God rest her soul. He's been alone for a few years now, since his father died, and I think he gets lonely sometimes, though he would never say so. It's nice to see him helping someone. It brings out the best in him. Camilla sensed that Margaret was saying more than her words suggested, but she did not press. Instead, she sipped her lemonade and let the conversation drift to other topics, learning about the Turners' 3 grown children who had all moved to different parts of the territory, about the challenges of ranching, about the small triumphs and large heartaches that made up a life. Lunch was a feast by Camilla's standards. Roasted chicken, potatoes, vegetables from Margaret's garden, and bread so fresh it steamed when broken open. Carter was called in to eat, along with several other ranch hands, and the table was crowded and noisy in a way that reminded Camilla of family dinners from her childhood. No one seemed to care about her heritage. They treated her as simply another guest, passing dishes and making conversation that included her naturally. She found herself laughing at a story one of the hands told about a stubborn cow, and the sound of her own laughter surprised her, rusty from disuse. After the meal, Carter excused himself to return to work on the wagon, and Camilla offered to help Margaret clean up. The two women worked side by side in the kitchen, washing dishes and putting away food, and Margaret hummed softly as she worked, a tune that Camilla did not recognize, but found comforting nonetheless. When the kitchen was clean, Margaret invited Camilla to see her garden, a patch of green that seemed miraculous in the dry landscape, sustained by careful irrigation and constant attention. "It takes work to make things grow here," Margaret said, running her hand along the leaves of a tomato plant. "But it's worth it. There's something deeply satisfying about nurturing life in a place that seems inhospitable to it. I think people are like that too, don't you? We all need nurturing, especially in harsh environments." Camilla nodded, understanding the metaphor. "You and your husband have been very kind to me," she said. "Kinder than I expected." "We judge people by their actions, not by their appearance," Margaret said simply. "That's how we were raised, and that's how we raised our children. The world would be a better place if more people remembered that we are all God's children, regardless of what we look like." They spent the afternoon in pleasant company, with Margaret teaching Camilla the names of the various plants in her garden and sharing tips for keeping them alive in the desert climate. The sun was beginning to lower when Carter appeared, his shirt stained with sweat and wood dust, but his expression triumphant. "It's done," he announced. "The wheel is as good as I can make it. It should hold you all the way to California, if you treat it gently." Camilla felt relief wash over her. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate for the gratitude she felt. "I do not know how to repay you." "No repayment necessary," Carter said, waving off her concern. "I'm just glad I could help. Let me hitch up your mule and we can get the wagon back to town before dark." The farewells took longer than Camilla expected, with Margaret insisting on packing food for her journey and Mr. Turner pressing coins into her hand despite her protests, saying it was for supplies she would need. Camilla felt overwhelmed by their generosity, by the simple human decency they had shown her, and she promised to write them from California when she arrived safely. The journey back to Wickenburg was quiet, with both Camilla and Carter lost in their own thoughts. The repaired wheel rolled smoothly, a testament to Carter's skill, and the mule seemed refreshed and ready to continue the journey. As the town came into view, Camilla felt a strange reluctance to arrive, to end this day that had been so unexpectedly pleasant. Carter helped her secure the wagon near the boarding house, checking the wheel one final time and pronouncing it sound. They stood together in the gathering dusk, and Camilla searched for words that could express what she was feeling, the gratitude and the strange sense of connection she had felt with this man who had appeared in her life so suddenly. "When do you plan to leave?" Carter asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Tomorrow," Camilla said, though even as she spoke the word, she found herself questioning it. "I should continue west while the weather is good." Carter nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "That makes sense," he said. Then after a pause, "I'll miss our conversations. It's been nice having someone to talk to who understands what it's like to be judged unfairly." Camilla looked at him in surprise. "You have been judged unfairly?" "Not like you have," Carter admitted. "But when I first came to Arizona, people looked at me as a greenhorn, someone who didn't belong and never would. They made assumptions about what I could and couldn't do based on where I was from rather than who I was. It took time to prove myself, to show them I was more than their preconceptions. I imagine your struggle is much harder because your difference is visible, but I think I understand a small part of what you experience." His words touched something deep inside Camilla, a loneliness she had carried for so long she had forgotten it was there. "You do understand," she said softly. "More than most people ever try to." They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with something neither of them seemed ready to name. Finally, Carter cleared his throat and took a step back. "I should let you rest," he said. "You have a long journey ahead of you tomorrow." "Yes," Camilla agreed, though part of her wanted to ask him to stay, to continue talking under the stars that were beginning to emerge overhead. "Thank you again, Carter, for everything." "You are very welcome, Camilla," he said, her name on his lips sending a shiver through her despite the warm evening. "Safe travels." He walked away into the darkness, leading his horse, and Camilla stood watching until he disappeared from view. Then she turned and made her way into the boarding house, her heart heavy with an emotion she could not quite identify. That night, sleep eluded her. She lay in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Carter's blue-green eyes and kind smile, about the way he had defended her to Thompson, about the easy conversation they had shared. She thought about Margaret Turner's garden, about how things could grow even in harsh environments with the right care, and she wondered if maybe she had been running for so long that she had forgotten to look for places where she might take root. When dawn came, Camilla rose and dressed, but instead of packing her few belongings and preparing to leave, she found herself hesitating. She went down to breakfast and ate mechanically, her mind turning over a decision that felt momentous in ways she did not fully understand. After breakfast, she returned to her room and sat on the bed, her hands folded in her lap, thinking. She could leave Wickenburg today as planned, continue west to California, and the uncertain promise of acceptance she might find there. Or she could stay, at least for a while, and see if what she had felt yesterday was real or just a mirage born of loneliness and kindness. The thought of staying terrified her, because staying meant making herself vulnerable, meant risking rejection from people she was beginning to care about. But leaving also carried a cost, the cost of always wondering what might have been if she had been brave enough to try. The knock on her door startled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Mrs. Patterson standing in the hallway, her expression neutral but not unkind. "You have a visitor," Mrs. Patterson said. "Carter Tate is downstairs asking for you." Camilla's heart leaped in her chest. "I will be right down," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. She checked her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand, smoothing her hair and pinching her cheeks to bring color to them, then made her way downstairs. Carter was waiting in the parlor, his hat in his hands, looking nervous in a way that made him seem younger and more vulnerable. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said when he saw her. "I know you were planning to leave today, but I wanted to talk to you before you did. If you have time, that is." "I have time," Camilla said, settling into a chair and gesturing for him to sit as well. Carter sat on the edge of the sofa, turning his hat in his hands. "I didn't sleep much last night," he began. "I kept thinking about you leaving, about never seeing you again, and I realized that I didn't want that. I know we just met, and I know you have plans to go to California, but I was wondering if maybe you might consider staying in Wickenburg for a while, just to see if maybe there could be something worth staying for." His words were so close to her own thoughts that Camilla felt tears spring to her eyes. "I did not sleep much either," she admitted. "I was thinking the same thing, wondering if I was foolish to leave when I have found people who treat me with kindness." Carter's face lit up with hope. "So you might stay?" "I might," Camilla said carefully. "But I need to understand what I would be staying for. Carter, I need to know that this is not just pity or temporary kindness that will fade when the novelty wears off. I have been hurt too many times by people who seemed kind at first, but revealed their true feelings later." "It's not pity," Carter said earnestly, leaning forward. "Camilla, I have met a lot of people in my life, and I have never met anyone like you. You are strong and brave and beautiful, and you have every reason to be bitter and angry at the world, but instead, you are still looking for good in people. You are still hoping for better. That takes courage I'm not sure I have. And yes, we just met, but sometimes you know things right away, you know? Sometimes you meet someone and you just understand that they could be important, that they could mean something. Camilla felt her breath catch. You feel that too? I do, Carter confirmed. I felt it the moment I saw you standing by that broken wagon, refusing to be defeated by your circumstances. I felt it when you took my hand despite having every reason to distrust me. I felt it all through yesterday, and I felt it even more when I thought about you leaving. So, yes, I feel it, and I am hoping that maybe you feel something similar. I do, Camilla whispered. I feel it too. But I am afraid, Carter. I am afraid of hoping for something that might not be real. Carter set his hat aside and reached out, taking her hands in his. His grip was warm and steady, grounding her. I can't promise that everything will be perfect, he said. I can't promise that people in this town will suddenly change their minds about you, or that you won't face more prejudice and cruelty. But I can promise that I will be by your side through it. I can promise that I see you, Camilla, not your skin or your heritage, but you, the person you are inside. And I can promise that I will do everything in my power to make you happy if you will give me the chance. Camilla looked down at their joined hands, at the way her darker skin contrasted with his lighter tone, and instead of seeing difference, she saw a picture of two people reaching across divides to find connection. She thought about everything she had endured to reach this moment, all the towns that had rejected her, all the people who had looked at her with hatred or disgust, and she realized that perhaps it had all been leading her here, to this place, to this man who saw past surfaces to the heart underneath. I will stay, she said, lifting her eyes to meet his. I will stay and see where this leads us. The smile that spread across Carter's face was like sunrise breaking over the desert, bright and full of promise. You won't regret it, he said. I'll make sure of it. In the days that followed, Camilla settled into a routine that was strange and wonderful in its ordinariness. She extended her stay at the boarding house, and Carter visited every evening after his work at the ranch was finished, bringing her small gifts, wildflowers he had picked on the ride into town, a book he thought she might enjoy, once a string of colorful beads he had purchased from a Mexican trader. They would sit on the porch of the boarding house and talk for hours, sharing stories from their pasts, their hopes for the future, their thoughts on everything from religion to politics, to the best way to make coffee. Not everyone in Wickenburg was happy about their developing relationship. There were whispers and pointed looks, and more than once Camilla overheard cruel comments about the cowboy who had forgotten his place and the mixed breed woman who was above her station. Carter heard them too, and each time his jaw would tighten and his eyes would flash with anger, but he never responded with violence, only with quiet dignity that made Camilla love him more. Because she was falling in love with him, she realized one evening as they sat watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. It had happened gradually, and then all at once, built from small moments of kindness and large gestures of support, from the way he listened when she spoke and the way he defended her when others did not. She had not meant to fall in love, had not believed herself capable of it after so many years of protecting her heart, but Carter had slipped past her defenses with patience and genuine affection, and now she could not imagine her life without him in it. A month after she had decided to stay, Carter asked her to come out to the Turner Ranch for the day. They rode out together in her now repaired wagon, with Carter's horse tied behind, and he showed her around the property with pride, pointing out improvements he had helped make and telling her stories about the cattle and horses. The Turners welcomed her warmly, as they always did, and Margaret pulled her aside at one point with a knowing smile. He's in love with you, Margaret said bluntly, in case you hadn't noticed. Camilla felt her cheeks heat. I had noticed, she admitted, and I am in love with him too. Good, Margaret said with satisfaction. You're good for each other. You make him smile more than I've ever seen, and he makes you look less afraid. That's what love should do, make both people better than they were alone. That evening, As they prepared to return to town, Carter led Camila to a spot on the edge of the ranch property where the land dropped away into a valley, the view stretching for miles. The sun was setting and the sky was ablaze with color, and Carter took her hand as they stood together looking out at the vast landscape. "I've been thinking," Carter said, his voice nervous, "about the future, about what I want from life. And I realized that what I want is you, Camilla. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are beside me. I want to build a life together, have a home, maybe children someday if you want them. I know it won't be easy. I know people will judge us and make our lives harder than they should be. But I don't care about any of that. I only care about you and me and the love I feel for you." Camilla turned to face him, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Are you asking me to marry you, Carter Tate?" "I am," Carter said, dropping to one knee despite the dust and rocks. "I don't have a ring yet, but I will get you one, the prettiest one I can afford. Camila Herrera, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears streamed down Camilla's face, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet and into her arms. "Yes, I will marry you." They held each other as the sun finished setting, as the stars began to emerge, as the desert night wrapped around them like a blanket. Camilla felt a peace settle over her that she had never experienced before, a sense of finally being exactly where she was meant to be. The wedding took place 2 months later in the Turner's parlor, officiated by a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through. Camilla wore a dress that Margaret had helped her make, a simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she carried wildflowers that Carter had picked that morning. The guest list was small: the Turners, a few ranch hands who had become friends, Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house, and a Mexican family from outside town who had heard about the wedding and wanted to show their support. Not everyone approved, of course. There had been talk in town, ugly words and threats that Carter had shielded Camilla from as much as possible. The preacher had initially refused to perform the ceremony, citing laws against mixed-race marriage that Carter had angrily pointed out did not actually exist in Arizona territory. In the end, the preacher had agreed, though more from fear of Carter's anger than from conviction, and Camilla did not care about his motives, only about the result. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Carter kissed her with such tenderness that Camilla felt her knees weaken. The small group erupted in applause, and Margaret immediately produced a cake she had baked in secret, and there was music from a fiddle that one of the ranch hands played with surprising skill. They danced in the Turner's parlor, Camilla and Carter moving together as if they had been doing so all their lives. And when Camilla looked around at the smiling faces of the people who had chosen to celebrate with them despite social pressure, she felt gratitude so intense it was almost painful. Carter had used his savings to purchase a small piece of land adjacent to the Turner Ranch, 20 acres with a creek running through it and enough grazing for a few cattle. Mr. Turner had offered to sell it to him at a price far below market value, saying that he wanted good neighbors and couldn't think of anyone better. With the help of the other ranch hands, Carter had built a small house, just 3 rooms, but sturdy and well made, with a porch facing east to catch the morning sun. Camilla saw the house for the first time on her wedding night, and she stood in the doorway, looking at the simple furniture Carter had built himself, the curtains he had hung with inexpert hands, the bouquet of wildflowers he had placed on the table, and she felt love swell in her heart until she thought she might explode from it. "It's not much," Carter said nervously from behind her, "but it's ours and I will make it better over time. I promise you will have a real home, Camila, the kind you deserve." She turned to him, taking his face in her hands. "It is already perfect," she said, "because you are here and that makes it home." They spent their wedding night learning each other in ways that were both tender and passionate, and when Camilla woke the next morning with Carter's arm around her waist and sunlight streaming through the window, she felt a happiness so complete it almost frightened her. She had been conditioned to expect that good things would be taken away, that joy was temporary and always followed by pain, but as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the happiness persisted. Life as Carter's wife was not without challenges. There were people in Wickenburg who refused to do business with them, who crossed the street to avoid passing them on the boardwalk, who made comments loud enough to be overheard, but quiet enough to deny if confronted. Camilla learned to hold her head high and ignore them, drawing strength from Carter's unwavering support and from the small but growing circle of friends who accepted them. Carter continued to work at the Turner Ranch while building up their own small herd of cattle, and Camilla took in sewing and laundry to earn money, work she did at home so she did not have to face the town more than necessary. She also planted a garden, remembering Margaret's lessons, coaxing vegetables and herbs from the dry soil with patience and care. The garden became her sanctuary, a place where she could work out her frustrations and fears with her hands, where she could nurture growth and see the tangible results of her efforts. A year after their marriage, Camilla discovered she was pregnant. The realization came with a mixture of joy and terror, for she knew that bringing a child into a world that had been so cruel to her meant subjecting that child to potential cruelty as well. When she told Carter, he swept her into his arms and spun her around, his face radiant with excitement, and his joy was so genuine that it eased some of her fears. "Our child will be loved," Carter said firmly, "by us and by the people who matter. And we will teach him or her to be strong, to be kind, to judge people by their character, just as we do. Our child will make the world better just by being in it, Camilla." I know it. Throughout her pregnancy, Carter was attentive to the point of being overprotective, insisting she rest more, taking over the heavier chores, worrying constantly about her health. Margaret Turner became a regular visitor, bringing advice and baby clothes and reassurance, and the bond between Camilla and the older woman deepened into something like the mother-daughter relationship Camilla had lost so young. The baby came in the spring, born at home with Margaret serving as midwife and Carter pacing outside until Margaret finally took pity and allowed him in. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Camilla thought she might not survive it, but finally, just as dawn was breaking, she gave birth to a son. They named him Samuel, after Carter's father, with the middle name Daniel in honor of Mr. Turner. And when Carter held his son for the first time, tears streaming down his face, Camilla felt her heart expand to accommodate a new depth of love. Samuel had his father's eyes and his mother's skin tone, a beautiful blending that proclaimed his mixed heritage to anyone who looked at him. Carter adored him immediately and completely, spending hours simply watching him sleep, marveling at his tiny fingers and toes, singing him lullabies that Carter's mother had sung to him. Camilla watched her husband transform into a father and fell in love with him all over again, seeing the gentleness he showed their son, the fierce protectiveness that emanated from him whenever anyone looked at Samuel with anything less than admiration. Not everyone was admiring, of course. There were comments about the baby's skin, about the wisdom of bringing mixed children into the world, about the problems Samuel would face as he grew. Camilla heard them and hurt for her son, but she also saw the love that surrounded him from the people who mattered. Carter and the Turners, the ranch hands who had become like uncles, Mrs. Patterson, who had softened considerably over the years and who brought a handmade blanket for Samuel. She realized that they were building their own community, one based not on superficial similarities, but on shared values of kindness and acceptance. When Samuel was 6 months old, a Mexican family moved onto land near theirs, and Camilla found friendship with the wife, Rosa, who had 2 children of her own and understood the challenges of raising children in a place that viewed them with suspicion. The 2 women spent time together while their husbands worked, sharing recipes and child-rearing advice and simply enjoying the companionship of someone who understood their experiences. As Samuel grew from baby to toddler, Camilla watched him explore the world with fearless curiosity, and she and Carter did their best to shield him from prejudice while also preparing him for a world that might not always be kind. They taught him to be proud of who he was, to never apologize for his heritage, to judge himself by his actions and character rather than by what others said about him. 2 years after Samuel's birth, Camilla found herself pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect. Their daughter was born in the fall, a quick labor that left Margaret laughing at how different each birth could be. They named her Grace because Camilla said she was grace incarnate, a blessing they had not known to hope for. Grace had her mother's dark hair and her father's smile, and she was welcomed into the world with the same fierce love that had greeted Samuel. With two children, life became busier and more chaotic, but also richer and more meaningful. The house they had thought adequate now seemed too small, and Carter spent his spare time adding two more rooms, working by lamplight after the children were asleep. Their small herd of cattle had grown steadily, supplemented by income from Carter's work at the Turner Ranch and Camilla's sewing, and they were beginning to build genuine prosperity. Not everyone in Wickenburg had changed their minds about Carter and Camilla, but over time, more people had come to accept them, won over by Carter's honest work ethic and Camilla's quiet dignity. The children helped too, for it was harder to maintain prejudice in the face of Samuel's infectious laugh and Grace's sweet nature. Slowly, incrementally, they were carving out a place for themselves in the community, proving through their daily lives that love and family transcended the arbitrary boundaries of race. When Samuel was 5 and Grace was 3, the old wheelwright Thompson fell ill, and there was no one else in town with the skills to repair wagons and wheels. Businesses suffered, and people grumbled about having to travel to the next town for repairs. One evening, Carter came home with a thoughtful expression, and over supper he proposed an idea to Camilla. "I've been thinking I might learn wheelwrighting," he said. "Thompson won't teach me, but there are books, and I'm good with my hands. I could start small, just helping neighbors, and build from there. It would mean more income, more security for us and the children." "I think that is a wonderful idea," Camilla said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "You can do anything you set your mind to, Carter. I believe in you." So Carter began teaching himself wheelwrighting, practicing on their own wagon and on equipment around the ranch, slowly building skill and confidence. When Thompson died 6 months later, Carter quietly let it be known that he was available for repairs, and people came, tentatively at first and then more regularly, appreciating his fair prices and good work. Some still muttered about doing business with someone married to a Mexican Apache woman, but their need for his services outweighed their prejudice, and Carter took their money with polite professionalism and private satisfaction. The wheelwright business grew steadily, and Carter built a workshop near their house where he could work while still being close to his family. Samuel loved watching his father work, asking endless questions about tools and techniques, and Carter patiently explained everything, already seeing that his son might follow in his footsteps one day. Grace preferred to stay with Camilla, helping in the garden and learning to sew, her small fingers clumsy but earnest as she tried to mimic her mother's stitches. Years passed in a rhythm of work and family, challenges and triumphs, sorrows and joys. Carter's father, Daniel Turner, died when Grace was 7, and they mourned him deeply, for he had been instrumental in helping them build their life. Margaret continued to be a fixture in their lives, adopting Samuel and Grace as surrogate grandchildren and spoiling them appropriately. The ranch passed to the Turners' eldest son, who maintained his parents' values of fairness and inclusivity, and Carter continued to work there part-time while focusing more on his wheelwright business. Wickenburg itself changed slowly over the years. The railroad came through when Samuel was 10, bringing more people and more commerce, and with that growth came a slight softening of attitudes. Not everyone changed their minds, but enough people did that Camilla found she could walk through town without constantly feeling judged, could shop in stores without being followed suspiciously, could exist without the constant weight of hostility pressing down on her. Samuel grew into a thoughtful, kind young man who had inherited his father's work ethic and his mother's resilience. He helped Carter in the workshop and showed a natural talent for the craft, and it gave Carter deep satisfaction to know that the business he had built would continue after him. Grace grew into a spirited girl who loved reading and learning, who asked questions about everything and accepted the answers with serious consideration. Both children knew they were different from many of the other children in town, but they had been raised with such love and confidence that they wore their difference as a badge of honor rather than a source of shame. When Samuel was 18 and beginning to court a young woman from one of the Mexican families that had settled near them, and Grace was 16 and already planning to become a teacher despite the obstacles she would face, Carter and Camilla sat on their porch one evening and reflected on the life they had built together. "Do you ever regret staying?" Carter asked, his hand finding hers in the twilight. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you had gone on to California like you planned?" Camilla considered the question seriously, for Carter deserved honest answers. "I wonder sometimes," she admitted, "but I do not regret it. California might have offered me acceptance from strangers, but staying here gave me love from you and family and a home in the truest sense. I would not trade that for anything." "I'm glad," Carter said, raising her hand to his lips and kissing it gently, "because you gave me everything I never knew I needed. You made me better than I was, Camila. You and the children are my whole heart." "And you are mine," Camilla said softly. "You saw me when others would not. You saw past skin to heart, and that made all the difference." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting so many years ago. The house behind them was filled with the sounds of their children, and the land around them was theirs, earned through hard work and perseverance. It had not been an easy road, but it had been worth traveling, every difficult step leading them to this moment of peace and contentment. Samuel married his sweetheart when he was 20, and they built a house on the edge of Carter and Camilla's property, close enough for family, but far enough for independence. The young couple's first child, a boy they named Carter after his grandfather, arrived 2 years later, and Camilla held her grandson and marveled at the circle of life, at how love could multiply and expand across generations. Grace pursued her dream of teaching despite facing resistance from some community members who did not think a woman of mixed heritage should be educating children. She persevered with the same quiet determination her mother had shown, and eventually she won a position at a small school serving the Mexican and Native families in the area. She loved her work with a passion that reminded Camilla of how she felt about her garden, nurturing growth and watching it flourish. Carter's wheelwright business became one of the most respected in the territory, known for quality work and fair dealing. He trained several apprentices over the years, including Samuel and two young men from town who had overcome their prejudices, to learn from him. The business provided well for the family, allowing them a level of comfort Camilla had never imagined possible in those early days when she had been turned away by Thompson. Margaret Turner lived to be 83, remaining sharp and engaged until the very end. When she passed, Camilla and Carter were at her bedside, along with her children and grandchildren, and her last words to Camilla were, "You made my boy smile. Thank you for that." Camilla wept at the funeral, mourning the loss of the woman who had been the mother she needed when she needed her most. As Carter and Camilla grew older, moving into their 50s and then their 60s, they saw Wickenburg continue to change and evolve. The rough frontier town of their youth became more established, with schools and churches, with businesses that lasted generations. The prejudices that had marked their early years never disappeared entirely, but they diminished enough that when Samuel and his wife had their third child, a daughter with dark hair and blue-green eyes, no one commented negatively on her appearance. Progress was slow and imperfect, but it was progress nonetheless. Grace married a teacher from Phoenix when she was 28, a man who loved her fierce intelligence and shared her passion for education. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl, and Grace continued teaching while raising her family, proving that women could do both despite what convention suggested. Camilla was endlessly proud of her daughter, seeing in her the confidence and strength she herself had lacked at that age. When Carter turned 65, he decided to slow down, training Samuel to take over the wheelwright business entirely while he focused on smaller projects and spending time with his grandchildren. He and Camilla would sit on their porch in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the sky, talking about memories and dreams, about the past they had survived and the future they had built. If I could go back and tell that young man who found you on the side of the road what was coming, Carter said one evening, I would tell him that helping you was the best decision he would ever make, that you would give him a life beyond his wildest imaginings. And I would tell that frightened young woman that she was about to meet someone who would change everything, Camilla replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. That she should stay, should take the risk, because the reward would be worth any hardship. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren. Nearly 20 people gathered in their home to honor the love that had started with a broken wagon wheel and a cowboy who chose kindness over prejudice. There were toasts and laughter, stories told and retold, and through it all, Carter kept Camilla's hand in his grip still strong despite his years. Samuel had expanded the wheelwright business to include general carpentry, and he employed several workers, including two of his own sons, who showed promise in the trade. Grace had become the principal of her school, respected throughout the region for her innovative teaching methods and her dedication to her students. Both children had surpassed their parents in terms of social acceptance and financial success, but they never forgot the struggles that had made their achievements possible, and they taught their own children about resilience and kindness and seeing past surface differences. When Carter was 70, he developed a cough that would not go away, and despite Camilla's herbal remedies and the doctor's medicines, it grew steadily worse. By winter, it was clear that his time was growing short, and he faced this reality with the same calm pragmatism he had brought to every other challenge in his life. I'm not afraid, he told Camila as she sat beside his bed, holding his hand. I've had a good life, better than I deserved. I've been loved by the best woman I ever met, and I've raised good children who will carry on after me. A man can't ask for more than that. I am afraid, Camilla admitted, tears streaming down her face. I do not know how to exist in a world without you in it. You'll manage, Carter said with confidence. You're the strongest person I know, Camilla. You survived things that would have broken most people, and you did it with grace and dignity. You'll miss me, and I'll miss you, but you'll go on because that's what you do. You endure. Carter passed away on a cold January morning with Camilla beside him, their children and grandchildren gathered around. His last words were, I love you, spoken so softly that only Camilla heard them, and she whispered the same words back as his hand went slack in hers. The funeral was large, attended by people from all over the territory, a testament to the respect Carter had earned through his life. People spoke of his kindness and his skill, his fair dealing and his moral courage in standing by his wife when others would have taken the easier path. Camilla listened to the tributes and felt pride mixed with grief, knowing that Carter had lived a life that mattered, that had made a difference. The months after Carter's death were the hardest of Camilla's life, worse even than the difficult years of her youth, for now she knew what she had lost. She moved through her days like a ghost, performing necessary tasks but feeling disconnected from them. Samuel and Grace worried about her, taking turns staying with her, trying to draw her back into life, but she remained distant, locked in grief. It was her garden that finally brought her back. Spring came, and the plants began to grow despite her neglect, and one morning she found herself kneeling in the dirt, pulling weeds, and speaking to Carter as if he could hear her. She told him about the children and grandchildren, about the world continuing to turn despite his absence, and as she worked, she felt something loosen in her chest, the first easing of the grief that had held her paralyzed. She began living again, slowly at first, and then with more purpose. She spent time with her grandchildren, teaching them the things she had learned over her long life, how to grow vegetables in desert soil, how to sew a straight seam, how to judge people by their hearts rather than their appearances. She told them stories about their grandfather, about how he had been different from other men, how he had seen her as a person worthy of love when others saw only skin that was different. Your grandfather saved me, she told them, not because I was helpless, but because he gave me a chance to save myself. He believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself, and that belief gave me the courage to build a life. That is what love does. It gives us courage. Camilla lived another 10 years after Carter's passing, years filled with the joy of watching her family continue to grow and thrive. She saw Samuel's business expand to include a store selling tools and supplies, saw Grace open a second school in a neighboring town, saw great grandchildren born who would never know the harsh prejudices of her youth. The world was changing, slowly but surely, becoming more tolerant and accepting, and while it would never be perfect, it was better than it had been. And that was something. On a warm spring evening, shortly after her 82nd birthday, Camilla sat on her porch watching the sunset, surrounded by three generations of family. Samuel's oldest son was telling a story about a difficult repair he had made, and everyone was laughing, and Camilla felt a contentment so complete it brought tears to her eyes. She thought about the frightened young woman she had been, stranded on a desert road with a broken wagon and no hope, and she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about Carter, about his kind eyes and steady hands, about the way he had looked at her and seen not skin but heart, and she whispered a thank you into the twilight, hoping that wherever he was, he could hear her. That night, Camilla went to sleep and did not wake up, passing peacefully in her bed with moonlight streaming through the window. Her family mourned her deeply, but also celebrated her life, recognizing that she had overcome extraordinary challenges to build something beautiful and lasting. At her funeral, Grace spoke about her mother's courage and resilience, about the lessons she had taught through her example, about the love she had given so freely, despite having received so little in her early years. My mother was different, Grace said, and people made her pay for that difference with cruelty and rejection. But she never let that cruelty make her cruel, never let that rejection make her reject others. She remained open to love when it finally found her, and she built a life that proved that differences are only as important as we allow them to be. She and my father showed us that love sees past skin to heart, and that lesson is their greatest legacy. Camilla was buried next to Carter on a hill overlooking the land they had built together, and their gravestone bore a simple inscription. They saw hearts, not skin, and love made them whole. The family they had created continued to grow and flourish, generation after generation, carrying forward the values of kindness and acceptance that Carter and Camilla had lived by. The wheelwright shop that Carter had started became a landmark in Wickenburg, operated by Samuel and then by Samuel's children, a reminder of the man who had chosen compassion over prejudice and had been rewarded with a life rich in love. The schools where Grace had taught continued to serve children of all backgrounds, and she was remembered as a pioneer who had opened doors for others to follow. Years later, when Samuel's great-granddaughter asked him what his grandparents had been like, he told her the story of a broken wagon wheel and a cowboy who stopped to help, of a woman whose skin was different and the cruelty she had endured, of love that had bridged divides and created a family that would never forget the courage it took to choose each other in a world that said they should not. They taught us that love is a choice, Samuel said, and that choosing love, even when it's difficult, even when the world is against you, is always the right choice. They showed us that what matters is not how we look, but how we treat each other, not where we come from, but where we choose to go. That's their gift to us, and we honor them by living that truth every day. The story of Carter and Camilla became part of family legend, told and retold, embellished and refined, but always returning to the essential truth that a cowboy had seen past skin to heart, and that vision had changed everything. Their love had created ripples that extended far beyond their own lives, influencing generations, making the world incrementally better through the example they had set. In the end, they had proven that love could overcome hatred, that courage could triumph over prejudice, that two people willing to stand together could build something beautiful and lasting, even in the harsh landscape of the American West. Their story was one of hardship transformed into hope, of pain transformed into purpose, of differences transformed into strengths. It was a story of the Wild West, but more than that, It was a story of the human heart's capacity for love, and that story was timeless. The house they had built still stood decades later, occupied by their descendants. The porch where they had spent so many evenings watching sunsets, still facing east to catch the morning light. The garden Camilla had planted still grew, tended by hands that had learned from her, producing vegetables and herbs that fed family members who had never met her but who knew her through the stories that were told. The workshop Carter had built still echoed with the sounds of hammers and saws, though the work done there had evolved with the times. Wickenburg itself had grown from a rough frontier town into a thriving community, and while it would be dishonest to say that prejudice had disappeared entirely, it had diminished enough that the story of Carter and Camilla was remembered not as shocking, but as inspiring, a reminder of values worth upholding. The boarding house where Camilla had stayed was now a historical landmark, and tourists sometimes asked about the Mexican Apache woman who had married a cowboy and helped build a dynasty. But more than buildings or businesses or even family lines, what lasted was the lesson that Carter and Camilla had taught through their lives, that love requires courage, that courage can change the world, and that the only skin that matters is the one that covers a good heart. They had lived that truth, had suffered for it, and triumphed through it. And their legacy was a family and a community that remembered and honored what they had fought for. In the end, they had been just two people who found each other against impossible odds, who chose love despite everything arrayed against them, who built a life that mattered through daily acts of courage and kindness. Their story was extraordinary in its ordinariness, remarkable in its simplicity, a testament to the power of seeing past surfaces to the essence underneath. And so their story ended where it began, with a broken wagon and a chance encounter, with a woman whose skin was different, and the cowboy who did not see skin, only heart. From that moment had flowed everything else: love and family, struggle and triumph, sorrow and joy. A whole life built on the foundation of one man's choice to help and one woman's choice to trust. It was a good story, a true story, and most importantly, it was a love story that lasted not just through their lifetimes, but through all the generations that came after, a reminder that love, real love, sees past everything that divides us to the humanity that unites us all.